Montana Territory, July 1883. The wind tore through the Bitterroot Valley like it was trying to rip the day apart. But it was not the sky that broke, it was her. Presley Lantham stood alone in her wedding dress, boots half sunk in the soft churchyard mud, veil twisted by the wind. The white lace clung to her like a cruel joke. Behind her, the tiny clapboard church sat silent, the guests already gone. Her father had pulled away in his wagon without a word, and the preacher had given her a sad look before disappearing inside. He had left her. Edwin Barrow, the banker's son from Helena, her fiancé of 10 months, he had not even ridden out to say it himself, just a note, folded and left on the altar beside the ring. "I can't do this. I'm not the man you think I am." She had read it twice. Once to understand it, twice to believe it. Now the churchyard was empty except for her, the note, and the wind. She stared at the distant mountains, breathing hard, veils slipping from her hair. Her chest ached, but she would not cry. Not here. Not today. Not in front of God or the empty pews or whatever ghost of Edwin still haunted the altar. A horse snorted behind her. She turned fast, heartbeat jerking. A man sat tall in the saddle, his silhouette dusted in sunlight. He looked like he had come from nowhere, a steady figure in a world that had just cracked open. He dismounted without a word, boots crunching dry grass, and moved toward her with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen worse things than a runaway groom. "Church is empty," he said. His voice was low, rough-edged. "You all right?" "No," Presley said. "But I will be," he nodded, taking off his hat. "Name's Callum Easley." She looked at him, dust on his coat, a rope coiled at his saddle, the way his eyes never tried to pity her. Just watched, like he was trying to see the whole truth of her. "Presley Lantham," she said. "Or just Presley now." Callum looked down at the note in her hand. "He left you here," she folded it. "He did." He nodded again. Not surprised, not shocked, just taking it in the way quiet men do. Then his gaze swept the church, the mountains behind it, and landed back on her. "Where's your people?" "My father's gone," said I. Embarrassed him. "My mother died 6 years ago." He hesitated. "You got anywhere to go?" She didn't answer. Just stood there, veil loose in her hand, dress tugged by the breeze. Her silence was answer enough. Callum shifted, then glanced at the sun. "I have a cabin west of here, about 2 hours' ride. You should not stay out here tonight. There's no one left." Presley stared at him. "You want to rescue me?" His mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite. "No, you are not a woman who needs rescuing. I am offering you a ride." She looked back at the church one last time. Then she nodded. "Fine," she said, "but I am not riding side saddle." Callum grinned, just barely. "Good." He helped her mount, careful with her skirt, and they rode west, the mountains burning gold in the light of the setting sun. The cabin was small, built solid out of pine and stone. It sat tucked near a creek, with a lean-to for the horses and a woodpile stacked straight. Presley stepped inside and smelled the cedar smoke from the hearth, the faint scent of leather and pine soap. Callum brought in her satchel, what little she had taken from the church, and set it near the door. "I have coffee," he said, "and bread." "I do not need anything," he nodded. "Still, it is there." She sat at the small table and stared at the log wall across from her. The silence stretched. Then she said, "Did you ever get left behind?" Callum stirred the fire. "No, but I left someone once, years ago." "Why?" He looked over his shoulder. "Because I was not right for her. And I was too much of a coward to say it to her face." Presley's fingers curled around the edge of her skirt. "So you know what it feels like." He nodded slowly. "I do." They did not speak again for a long time. Presley changed out of the dress and folded it tight, pressing it into her satchel with both hands, like she could crush the memory down into nothing. That night, she slept in the bed. Callum took the floor. By morning, her tears were dry. She helped him feed the horses, stacked firewood without being asked, and boiled coffee strong enough to burn. "You planning on staying long?" he asked. Presley wiped her hands on her skirt. "I do not know." "You do not have to leave," he said. Their eyes met across the yard. Something honest passed between them. He did not say it out of pity, he meant it. "I never wanted to marry Edwin," she said. "Not really. I just wanted to be free of my father, free of Helena. I thought marrying someone with a bank name would get me out." Callum scratched his jaw. "That is not freedom, Presley." She looked down. "I know that now." Callum walked closer. "You want to see what real freedom looks like?" She raised her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I work cattle up north. The land is open, wild. No one tells you who to be. You work hard, you eat well, you sleep under the stars. You want to come, I will take you with me. No promises, no expectations. Just a long road and your own voice." Presley stared at him. "Why would you offer that to me?" He hesitated. Then he said, "Because I saw you standing there in that churchyard like you had nothing left. And I think you deserve more than that. And I want to see what kind of woman you are when you are not trying to be something for someone else." Presley's throat tightened. She looked away, then back at him. "All right," she said. "I will come." Callum smiled. It was small, real. "Good." And so they packed the horses, 2 saddlebags each. Presley left the dress behind but kept the boots. She wore a plain cotton blouse and a borrowed hat, and when they rode north, she did not look back. They did not speak much. But when Presley rode beside him, her spine straight, wind in her hair, Callum glanced over and felt something shift in his chest. He liked the way she rode. Like she had always belonged to the open land. Like maybe she had just been waiting for someone to show her the road. They crossed into the Gallatin Valley under a pale sky, the grassland stretching wide and quiet around them. The land carried a hush that made Presley feel like she'd stepped out of her own life and into someone else's. She didn't ask where they were going. Callum rode ahead with the steadiness of a man who'd already lived through enough not to fill silence with words. By the 4th day, they reached a small ranch tucked against the shadow of the Bridger Range. Fences held together by frost-warped nails, smoke curling from a stone chimney, 3 milk cows in a corral that looked like it would give with one hard nudge. It wasn't much, but the place had a kind of stillness that felt earned. Callum dismounted, letting his horse drink from the trough. "Belongs to my sister's boy," he said. "He's off with a trail crew near 3 Forks. Asked me to check in before the calves drop." Presley stayed in the saddle, watching the wind comb through the grass. "You trust me enough to bring me here?" "I do," he said, and turned toward the barn without waiting for more. She followed him in, the air inside thick with hay and the old warmth of animals. He reached for a pitchfork, tossing straw into the stalls. Presley stepped to the side, palms sliding across the rough edge of a stall door. "Where'd you sleep before the wedding?" he asked, not looking at her. "Boarding house south of Helena. The kind with 3 locks on the door and no questions asked." He nodded, kept working. "You ever mucked before?" She took the pitchfork from him without answering and started in on the next stall. Her gloves were thin, and the handle bit into her palms, but she didn't slow. They worked until the sun lowered behind the shed and the cold came up from the earth. Inside the house, she lit a lamp and found a loaf wrapped in cloth and a tin of dried apples. They ate without ceremony, each at a corner of the table, the fire cracking in the stove. After a while, Presley said, "What happened to the woman you left?" Callum finished his coffee before he answered. "She married a schoolteacher out of Bozeman. Heard she's got 2 boys now." Presley leaned back in her chair. "You ever think about going back?" "No," he said. "She was right to want more than I could give her. I was too proud to admit it then." Presley's eyes didn't leave his face. "What changed?" He looked into the hearth. I stopped pretending I didn't need anything from life except the road. They sat in the quiet that followed, the kind that didn't itch or press, just filled the space like low thunder in the distance. That night, she laid her bedroll on the far side of the room. The wood floor creaked once as she settled in, and then all was still. She didn't dream. Or if she did, she didn't remember. In the morning, Callum showed her the calving pen out back. She rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside a heifer trembling through birth, her voice low and steady as she kept the mother calm. "You done this before?" Callum asked, crouching beside her. "No," she said, "but I've seen women do harder with less." He handed her a clean rag. "You're not afraid of mess. I've lived through worse kinds." The calf came fast after that, legs slick and trembling. Presley cleaned its mouth, letting it nuzzle her wrist. When it tried to stand, she laughed once, softly. Callum watched her, something unreadable in his expression. They stayed 3 days, tending the cows and mending the front gate. On the second evening, it rained. Presley stood on the porch, sleeves rolled to her elbows, face tipped to the sky. Callum joined her, the air smelling of wet pine and fence dust. "You ever want land of your own?" he asked. "I don't know yet. I've never been somewhere long enough to picture it." He didn't press. Just handed her the last of the coffee, still warm from the stove. When the rain let up, they packed again. Callum didn't ask if she was ready. Presley didn't say she was. They just rode out together, leaving the ranch behind with the gate swinging closed behind them. By then, she'd started humming now and then quiet tunes, never the same one twice. Callum didn't ask about the songs, and Presley didn't offer. But when they camped that night and she laid her bedroll a little closer to his, he didn't move away. The fire burned low, the stars sharp above them. Presley turned toward him, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "You think all this road, this way of living it ever leads to something solid?" Callum didn't answer right away. Then, "It can, if the right person rides beside you." Presley looked at him a long moment. Then she pulled her coat tighter and turned back toward the fire. Neither of them slept right away, but neither of them minded the waiting. They reached the Jefferson River in early August, where the water curved slow and silver through cottonwoods, and the sky stretched wide enough to hold the quiet between them. The land here was softer, the hills low and green, dotted with willows and buffalo grass. Callum led them to a flat stretch near the riverbank, where they could rest the horses and refill their canteens. Presley crouched at the water's edge, dipping her fingers into the shallows. A trout flashed beneath the surface, gone before she could follow its movement. She didn't speak, just let the cold seep into her skin. "You ever trap fish?" Callum asked, kneeling beside her. "No," she said. "My grandfather used to talk about it, but I never learned." He nodded toward a tangle of driftwood downstream. "I'll show you how to set a weir. Water's low enough it might draw something by morning." Presley stood and brushed the river silt from her hands. "You always this steady?" Callum pushed his hat back. "Not always, but there's no sense rushing what don't need rushing." They gathered branches and stones without speaking further. Presley noticed the way his sleeves were patched at the elbows, and how he checked each step for snake holes without making a fuss of it. He moved like someone who'd spent long years alone and had made peace with it. That evening, they built a fire from deadfall and dried moss. The smoke curled low, not enough to draw attention from the trail but enough to keep the mosquitoes off. Presley watched the flames. Her shoulders had lost their tightness. The corners of her mouth no longer held the same weight. "Why didn't you stay on at the cabin?" she asked. Callum fed a dry limb into the fire. "Wasn't mine to keep. I don't take what don't belong." "You could have made it yours," she said. He leaned back against a saddlebag. "I've never wanted a roof more than a road. Until now." Presley's eyes shifted toward him. "What's different now?" He didn't answer at first, just watched the fire crackle. Then, "You." She didn't look away then. "You think I'll let someone else steer my life again?" "No," he said softly. "I think you'd sooner ride into a storm than let that happen." The firelight flickered between them. Presley drew her knees close. She looked toward the tree line where the sky burned a slow red. "I used to dream of running off. But I never imagined what I'd find if I did." Callum shifted the coals. "Some things are better left unimagined, so they can surprise you when they come." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. The next morning, the weir had caught 2 small trout. Presley cleaned them with a flat stone, her hand steady. Callum brewed coffee over the embers, the scent rising with the morning chill. They ate without plates, fingers brushing once as they passed the fish between them. Later, they followed the river south. A pair of elk crossed their path, the bull pausing to watch them before vanishing into the timber. Presley kept her eyes on the horizon, but Callum noticed the way she sat easier in the saddle now. Less like a woman escaping something, more like one riding toward it. That afternoon, they came across a prospector's camp abandoned, the fire ring cold, a rusted pan left near a pile of charred logs. "Someone left in a hurry," Callum said, crouching to study the ground. Presley circled the site. "Tracks go east. 1 pack horse, maybe 2 riders." "No blood." Callum stood. "Then it wasn't trouble, maybe just bad luck." She walked to the edge of the clearing. "There's a coat. Looks like it's been here a while." He followed her gaze, then picked up the garment. It was stiff with rain and dirt, one sleeve torn clean through. He held it a moment, then dropped it beside the fire pit. Presley turned. "You ever get tired of strangers' scraps?" He shook his head. "Every scrap tells a story. Most folks don't stay long enough to listen." She nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe that's why they never really leave anything behind." They kept riding until the sun slipped behind the hills. Near a bluff overlooking the prairie, they stopped for the night. Presley gathered dry grass for bedding while Callum unsaddled the horses. The wind had a softness to it, like the land had decided to rest. After dinner, Presley sat cross-legged near the fire, her hair loose from its braid. "You ever think about what you'd be if you hadn't taken to the trail?" Callum looked at her, then down at his hands. "I was meant for this. Not sure I could have been anything else." "I think I could have been someone's burden," she said, voice low. "I was headed that way." He looked up. "You're no one's burden." She met his gaze. "You don't know what I carried." "I don't have to. You carried it. You're still here." She didn't speak after that, but her hand settled on the grass beside his. He reached over, slow and sure, and covered it with his own. They didn't say anything more that night, but when Presley lay down, she didn't leave space between them. And when she woke before dawn, his arm was around her waist, and she let it stay there. They crossed into Madison County under a sky broken by thin clouds, the kind that let sunlight through in quiet bands. Late summer had begun to turn the grass brittle, and the air carried a dry sharpness that hinted at the long wind of autumn ahead. They hadn't spoken much since the bluff, but something had shifted between them, not in words, but in the way Presley matched Callum's pace without needing to be asked, and how he always seemed to sense when to ride close and when to give her space. They stopped at a trading post 2 miles west of Ruby Creek. A man named Thatcher ran it out of a rough-hewn building with a porch that slumped to one side. There was a faded flag nailed above the door and a pair of mules tied out front, their ears flicking at flies. Callum tethered the horses and checked the cinches. "I'll trade for meal and salt. You need anything?" Presley stepped down. "Ink and paper, if he has any." Callum raised an eyebrow. "You write?" She brushed her skirt smooth. "Used to. Thought I might try again." Inside, the post smelled of tobacco and dust. Shelves held jars of lard, sacks of beans, a few bolts of cloth. Presley found a small ledger and a half-empty bottle of ink tucked behind a box of nails. She ran her fingers over the leather binding. Thatcher watched from behind the counter, his eyes sharp beneath a frayed hat. Not many women come through asking for paper. Presley didn't look at him. Most women aren't left with much to say. Thatcher scratched his neck and said nothing more. They left with their packs heavier and their coin lighter. That night, they camped beside a low ridge where the grass had grown tall and gold. Presley sat with her knees drawn up, the new ledger resting against her thighs. She dipped the nib in ink and let the pen hover. Callum set his hat aside. "What are you writing?" She didn't look up. "Names. Of things I've seen, places I don't want to forget." He nodded slowly, then leaned back on his elbows. "You think you'll miss anything from before?" She paused, pen stilled. "No. But I might want to remember what I survived." The firelight caught the curve of her jaw. She was quieter now, but there was a steadiness to her silence. She didn't fidget. She didn't look over her shoulder. She just wrote. Callum watched her, then looked toward the stars. "My mother used to say that a person's truth lies in what they do when no one's watching." Presley glanced at him. "And what is yours?" He didn't smile, didn't look at her. "I keep people at arm's length, always have. Thought it kept me from being disappointed." She set the ledger aside. "And now," he turned his head, met her gaze, "now I'm not so sure." The fire popped between them. Presley reached for her blanket and pulled it over her legs. "I don't know how to be close to someone who doesn't walk away." Callum's voice was rough with something unspoken. "Then we'll take it slow." She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away. Her hand lay open beside her, and after a moment he reached across and let his fingers rest over hers. They stayed like that until the fire burned low. By midweek, they passed through a grove of cottonwoods where the trunks grew white and narrow. A pair of does darted across the trail, and Presley stopped her horse to watch them vanish into the brush. Callum slowed beside her. "You ever hunted?" She shook her head. "I never had to." He reached for his rifle. "We'll need meat before long. There's grouse in these woods." She followed him through the undergrowth. He moved quiet as wind through grass, pausing often to listen. Presley stepped carefully, watching where he placed his boots, mimicking his stillness. They came upon a clearing where the light dappled through the canopy. Callum raised his hand, signaling her to stop. A pair of birds rustled in the brush ahead. He fired once. The shot echoed and the birds scattered. One dropped. Presley crouched beside it, her brow drawn. "It's small." Callum handed her a blade. "Still worth something. You want to try cleaning it?" She nodded. He didn't guide her hands, just knelt nearby and waited. She worked slow, her movements careful. When she finished, she wiped her palms on a scrap of cloth and looked up at him. "No one ever taught me how to survive for myself," she said. "Not really." Callum met her eyes. "You're learning faster than most." That night, they roasted the bird on a spit and shared it without ceremony. Presley wrote again after they ate, ink catching in the page's grain. Callum leaned back against his saddle. "What will you do when the road ends?" She didn't look up. "I'm not sure yet." "What if it doesn't end?" She glanced at him, the firelight warm in her eyes. "Then I hope you're still riding beside me." He didn't speak. Just reached for her hand again, and this time she twined her fingers through his, in the dark, with the trees rustling above them and the river murmuring in the distance. Neither of them moved apart. Whatever waited ahead, they would meet it together. Step by step, hand in hand. They reached the edge of a shallow basin ringed by cottonwood and alder, where the land sloped gentle, and the soil held the kind of richness that made Callum quiet. He dismounted near a stand of elderberry and walked the perimeter without a word, his boots pressing down grass, already yellowing in the late August heat. Presley tied her mare near a leaning post that looked like it had once held a gate. She watched him circle the old fence line, his hand brushing the tops of the taller weeds, the way his steps slowed near a patch of dry earth where the shape of something long gone still lingered. "What was here?" she asked. "Homestead," Callum said, glancing back toward her. "My uncle's. He died the year the snows came early." "Was it yours after?" "No legal claim. Nearest line rider never bothered to mark it. I reckon the land just waited." Presley stepped toward the center of the clearing. A broken wagon wheel lay half sunken in the dirt, rim cracked through. "Why bring me here?" Callum's eyes shifted toward the mountain shadow to the west. "Because I've been thinking about what comes after riding. And I wondered if you might want to see what a place of our own could look like." Presley's breath caught, not from surprise but from the way it settled in her chest like it had already been waiting. She turned full toward him, her fingers brushing the edge of the buckle at her waist. "You mean to stay?" she asked. "I mean to build," he said. They walked the land together, marking where the old well sat, where a foundation might be laid again. Callum pointed out where the sun would fall in winter, where the runoff would flow in spring. Presley knelt by the elderberry and whispered something he didn't hear. That night, they camped under the same stars they'd known for weeks, but something had changed. Presley laid out her ledger but didn't write. She sat beside Callum and leaned against his shoulder, and he didn't move, didn't breathe too deep, like the moment might startle if held too hard. "I don't know how to build a home," she said. "I don't either," he admitted. "Not the walls. But I know how to stay." Presley turned her face toward his. "That's the harder part." He reached for her hand, not tentative now, and brought it to his chest. "I don't want to go anywhere you're not." She didn't answer with words. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. Their kiss wasn't hurried or uncertain, it was slow, like the land around them, like trust that had taken its time and now settled deep. Come morning, they began clearing the ground. Presley rolled up her sleeves and helped haul fallen limbs into piles. Callum set stakes where a frame might rise. By week's end, they'd laid out a plan for a one-room house with a lean-to for tools and a small porch facing east. They rode 2 days south to trade for nails, tar cloth, and a kettle deep enough for boiling beans. At the mill, Presley bartered with a man she remembered from her father's dealings. He didn't recognize her, or if he did, he kept it to himself. They returned with the wagon heavy. Callum hitched a borrowed team and started the frame with a hand saw and pure patience. Presley hauled rock from the creek bed for the hearth. They worked through September, steady days marked by sweat and quiet satisfaction. Each evening, they sat on a pair of crates beneath the half-built porch. Presley read aloud from a tattered copy of Domi and Son they'd found at the mill. Callum listened with his eyes closed, one arm resting behind her shoulders. She'd never read aloud to anyone before. He'd never been read to. By the first frost, the roof was shingled and the stove lit. Presley hung a line of dried herbs above the window. Callum carved a stool for her and smoothed the seat with beeswax. He never said the word love, but he didn't need to. It lived in the way he brought her coffee before the fire warmed, in the hand he placed at her back when she stepped through the door. She didn't speak of the past except once. Late in October, when the wind howled hard against the shutters, she sat beside him with her knees pulled up beneath her shawl. "I used to think I'd never be touched again without it feeling like a debt," she said. Callum didn't speak. He just drew her close, his hand resting firm and still at her side until her breathing softened. "I was wrong," she whispered. He kissed her temple and let the silence answer. Winter came hard, but the house held. They trapped rabbit, boiled snow, and stitched blankets from wool she bartered off a passing peddler. One night, Presley stitched a name into a quilt corner. Easley. When Callum saw it, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You sure?" She looked up. I've never been more. In early spring, they rode to Virginia City, walked together into the clerk's office, and signed their names with hands that didn't shake. The preacher was a man with a limp and a kind voice who asked no questions. Presley wore a blue dress she'd sewn from traded calico. Callum wore his cleanest shirt and combed his hair. When he kissed her, she closed her eyes and wept not from sorrow, but from the weight of choosing freely. They returned home before nightfall. The house glowed with the fire she'd banked that morning. Callum lifted her down from the saddle and held her there a moment longer than needed. Inside, they lit a candle. She unpinned her hair. He drew her close. They didn't speak again that night. Years passed. The land held firm. A garden grew where the old wagon wheel had sunk, and a rocking chair sat beneath the porch Callum widened by hand. Presley taught the neighbor girl her letters each Tuesday. Callum broke horses in the meadow flat. They never left. They never needed to. And every evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and the light turned soft over the fields, Presley reached for the hand that had never once let go.